Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the CHCI session on Feeding Our Nation, Latino Workers in Agriculture. My name is Sasha Frausto, and I am the College Programs Manager at CHCI. Before we begin our panel, it is my distinct privilege to welcome our panel host, Congressman Jim Costa, and our moderator, Tzitziki Felix. Congressman Costa represents California's 16th Congressional District in the San Joaquin Valley and has served the district since 2005. His district includes Merced County, most of Madera County, and part of Fresno County. Representative Costa is a third-generation family farmer, and as a member of Congress, Costa has applied his farming background to fighting for valley water, agriculture, and the economy. Congressman Costa serves on the House Natural Resources Committee, focused on critical issues regarding water, and on the Agricultural Committee, where he is focused on effective federal support for agriculture. This panel will bring together representatives from across the agricultural sector, including unions, civil rights, and the public sector. To help us moderate this important and timely session, we are delighted to have Univision news anchor and host Tzitziki Felix. Ms. Felix is a multiple award-winning journalist who currently hosts Politica Ya, a national politics show in Washington, D.C., and is the news anchor for Univision Washington newscasts. She's received multiple Emmy Awards, including Outstanding Achievement by a News Anchor. I hope you enjoy the session, and don't forget to continue the conversation on social media with the hashtag CHCIHHM20. And now, without further ado, Congressman Costa.
Hello, I'm Congressman Jim Costa. I have the honor and the privilege to represent the 16th Congressional District in California. We call it the breadbasket of the world. And that's because we grow almost 400 commodities, some of the most healthiest and nutritional foods that every night go on America's dinner table. And I want to give a shout out and thank Congressional Hispanic Institute and the good work that CHCI does. The Hispanic Caucus Institute is organizing the conference, and it's important. As a member of the House Agriculture Committee and the subcommittee chair on livestock and foreign agriculture, I work hard every day to be an advocate on behalf of not just California agriculture, but our nation's agricultural industry. We know that for generations, Latinos have been an absolutely essential part of the production of food and fiber. From campesinos to in the second and third generations, working their way up to actually owning their own farms. Latinos are the largest part of the agricultural industry in California and growing throughout the country. That's important to note. It's part of the reason for this conference. 6 months ago or so, if we were all sitting around a room and having this conversation about what potential impacts a pandemic, this coronavirus, would have throughout our nation, I don't think many of us could have imagined how significantly, how devastatingly our health and safety would be at risk and compromised. Clearly, COVID-19 has impacted every part of America. Nowhere do we find that any greater than among our minority communities. And, you know, when you look at the work that the Latino community does in American agriculture, whether it's in the fields as the campesinos, or whether it's in packing sheds, or in the year-round agricultural work in food processing facilities, the nature of the work, and it's hard work, was never designed with a pandemic in mind. These are deemed essential workers. And they are, because we cannot live without food. But that means that we must do more to ensure that we protect these workers. So we'll continue to do everything we can to support the Latino workers, the campesinos, to ensure that they can continue to do what they do best, which is make sure that we all have good, healthy diets. So thank you very much, and keep up the good work. I'll keep doing my part, working with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute to ensure that we support good legislation that will benefit those Latino communities throughout our country who work so hard every day. I know, because I used to do that work as a young man on our own family's farm. And we must do the right thing by them and support them. Thank you.
I want to welcome everyone today at this powerful conference, and I also want to thank Representative Costa for these opening remarks. Representative Costa, it's certainly powerful to hear that you, yourself, as part of your family, were working on the fields. We have a great panel today, and it is an honor for me to be part of today's discussion. The reason for that is because as a journalist, I touch upon all these aspects every week in Politica Ya. And it is not just sad, but also frustrating to see all the things that need to get done right now for this community. We're talking about essential workers that at the end of the day are being treated as disposable people who are required to work without the safety measures that we all need. And we're going to be touching upon all these subjects and all these aspects of this problematic that we're facing as the Latinos in this wonderful country. Again, my name is Titiki Felix. I want to welcome every single one of you in joining us at this panel. We have Feeding Our Nation, Latino Workers in Agriculture. I'd like also to welcome everyone to send us your questions, comments. It would be great to hear from all of you as we go through this conversation and hear from our panelists, the experts, and our congressmen to see what is being done, not just the intention, not just the laws, or the legislations. What actions are we taking towards fixing the issues? Now, we're going to explore how Latino farm workers are essential to the American economy as well, and what changes we need to make sure to ensure their safety as well as the ability to fare well in the agricultural sector. And not just say that, not just because it's on the script, but also because everything that we eat, what we ate this morning, what we're going to be eating today, comes from the hands of Latinos who are facing a very dark future unless we do something about it. I'd like to welcome our panelists, and I'm going to start first with Reina Lopez. Reina Lopez is an executive director at PICUN, Oregon's Farm Worker Union, and it's the longest standing Latinx-led organization started by farm workers. She's also a fierce leader and advocate for the Latinx community in Oregon. Reina, bienvenida. Gracias por estar con nosotros.
Gracias. Thank you for having me today.
Now we have Monica Ramirez. She's a founder and leader for Justice for Migrant Women. She's a longtime advocate, organizer, social entrepreneur, and attorney. She's fighting to eliminate gender-based violence and secure gender equity. Monica, bienvenida.
Gracias, Tiki. It's great to be here.
Great to see you again, amiga. We also have Kim Cordova. She's the president of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union Local 7, which represents more than 20,000 meat processing and grocery workers in Colorado and Wyoming. She's tireless and advocate for this frontline and essential workers. Kim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here today.
And I just wanted to mention briefly that I was watching your speeches, Kim. They're very inspiring, and I'm very excited not just to have your perspective, but also to have Monica's, whose family as well and background tells us a lot. And of course, you, Reina, being on the West Coast right now dealing with the fires. We cannot wait to hear from you. Now, we also like to introduce Congressman Salud Carvajal, who's joining us today. Congressman, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's good to be here.
I know it's been a crazy day at the Congress. I have it right in front of us here in the office. Thank you so much for making the effort and the time to join us in this discussion.
Thank you. I just ran back from votes. As you know, votes sometimes are called at odd times, and it impacts our schedule. So I'm glad it seems to be working out right now.
Excellent. Congressman Salud Carvajal is from District 24 in California. Representative Carvajal sits on the House Committee on Armed Services, the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and the House Committee on Agriculture. And we're going to be talking about a letter and a legislation that was passed last year, Congressman, so you can explain to us a little bit more about what's being done about it and what actions are being taken to implement these measures. Thank you.
Glad to do so.
Now, with the situation that we are facing right now, it's important that we get not just the comments from our experts, but it's also important to keep the conversation flowing from everyone watching us, because everyone's experience and history is different. So as a journalist and as a moderator, I want to see not just what's being done, but also what's behind the issues, what's the root of the problem, and how we can all come together and find a solution. Now, let's start with the first questions, my dear colleagues. Shall we? Ready? Excellent.
Yes, ready.
So we're going to be talking about the situation that we're facing at this time. We have workers at the forefront who are struggling. They want to stay safe for them and their families, but they don't have the necessary resources or even the support. And this is something that we've been discussing recently. Now, Monica, I'd like to start with you. You've been on my show several times. In fact, I'm hoping that you'll be there this coming week. Your parents and your grandparents have worked in the fields. Now, what are we facing right now? What is pivotal at this moment that we need to discuss on this subject matter?
Well, I think it's critical for people who are tuning in to recognize that the issues that are facing farm workers right now, some of them are long-standing issues, not having safe working conditions, not having good housing, particularly those who are in migrant camps, transportation that's overcrowded, not having the protective equipment that they need. These are issues that farm workers have always confronted. Farm workers don't have paid leave. They're not being paid what they need to feed their families and equitably. But now you take this pandemic that has taken our world and turned it upside down and is affecting all of us in unnamed ways. And you look at the farm worker community that is already and historically has been excluded and has been suffering, and you add this pandemic on it. And what we need to understand about the pandemic is that while farm workers have continued to work throughout the crisis and take great pride in being able to do the work to feed this nation, the reality is that we've seen food insecurity, where farm workers are reporting that after working all day long, they don't always know that they'll have food for their own families. We've seen the lack of the personal protective gear that farm workers need to stay safe throughout the pandemic, and a lot of stress and fear that they're going to take the illness home and get their family members sick. The lack of broadband has certainly had a negative impact on farm worker children who have not been able to continue their studies. The list goes on, and we can't forget about the fact that there are farm workers around our country who've gotten sick with COVID and who have died. And while all of this has been happening, and while relief efforts have been underway by Congress, and thank you, Congressman Carvajal, for your leadership, the reality is that as COVID bills have been passed, farm workers and other immigrant workers have been left behind. So we have a huge challenge. It's a challenge upon a decades-long challenge of winning rights for farm workers, and it's only been exacerbated by the situation that the COVID-19 pandemic has created and presented for our country.
Excellent, Monica. And it is ironic what you just mentioned right now. Farm workers do not have food to feed their families. That's a very sad point that we definitely have to touch upon it. And I really thank you, not just for keeping the points short so that we can all keep the answers compact and we can discuss all the subjects. Now, going to you, Kim, I was also reading your biography, and I was watching some of the speeches that you mentioned, and you said that workers are not disposable. That's a very powerful statement, in my opinion, not just because they're being treated as essential workers, at the same time disposable. And we're having the situation as well where you cannot interview a dead worker. You mentioned that before. What do you mean by that?
Well, for packing house workers, essential workers, they've been treated as fungible widgets or as disposable or sacrificial human beings, simply so that CEOs and their shareholders can continue to be rich while workers are going to work every day, sacrificing their life to keep our country fed. And, OSHA has failed our workers. This administration has failed to protect workers in this country. And with COVID, for one of my plants, packing houses that I represent, it was one of the deadliest outbreaks with COVID-19. And, OSHA didn't do anything to protect them. 7 months and after 7 workers too late, they finally came in and issued a measly $15,000 fine to one of the largest protein producer in the world. And these workers' lives are worth more than $15,000. I mean, OSHA came in after these workers died. You cannot interview a dead worker. And these are critical and essential workers, critical to the food supply chain. And instead of protecting workers, our government is worried about providing immunity or a liability shield to big companies, and instead of taking care of the backbone of this country, which is frontline essential workers.
Excellent point. Now, you, Reina, you're on the West Coast. Not only, I mean, of course, we cannot deviate from the focus here, but you were telling us recently how you're dealing with the worst quality of air right now. We can imagine how the farm workers and our essential workers are facing not just the struggles. What are the main points that you can consider are facing the people that you represent right now, for instance, in Oregon and other places also in the country?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for bringing up the wildfires too, because it's after a pandemic, after just 2020 being a really intense year for our comunidades. We have also natural disasters happening on the West Coast, as a lot of you may have heard. And I think that one of the things that's really important to note is going back to the fact that a lot of our workers are being exploited. PECUN values the ability for workers to take action against exploitation and all of the effects. And we've continued to build an agenda that strengthens workers' rights by creating healthier workplaces, pushing for better wages, and really pressuring agencies like OSHA. And also here in Oregon, we have the Bureau of Labor and Industries. And in these difficult times, we have seen that the castes and the inequities already in our society have been magnified. What's happening here is that we are also seeing that in addition to the COVID-19 pandemic and that hitting our communities really hard. In fact, today in Oregon, 40% of the COVID cases are Latinx communities. And in the heart of Woodburn, where we're located, Marion County is 48% of those cases. But let me address a little bit about what's happening in the wildfires here in Oregon. Outdoor agricultural workers make up a significant portion of the resident population of the counties that have been most affected by the wildfires and the hazardous air quality that's in Oregon today. And right now, Oregon is in a state of an emergency. We've had evacuations in Marion County, Clackamas County, Jackson County, Talent, Oregon, Phoenix, Oregon, agricultural communities where right now the mobile home parks got completely burnt to ash, and families are trying to figure out what's next. And it's very important to understand that thousands of outdoor workers today in Oregon are working in these places where we're in level 1 and 2 evacuations, breathing a very high density of smoke due to the unprecedented effects of the fires that are burning our state today without protection, without protocols. And it seemed that we didn't learn from the COVID-19 pandemic when it first started, where we got the information very late in our language, and still seeing that same trend unfortunately happen. Having information to this access in Spanish, in indigenous languages, is very important. And we've been getting calls from agricultural workers since Tuesday across the state, just being very confused about the evacuation notices, the protocols, and being very concerned about what the effect's going to be on their bodies if they're in a zone that is right now at very unhealthy levels in terms of hazardous air quality indexes.
Incredible, Reina, that you're sharing that, because as a matter of fact, I've been hearing from reporters going through these areas where they're wearing a mask, they're inside their cars, and still they're facing issues breathing. I can only imagine what's going on with our workers and people that are putting the food on the table. So thank you for sharing that. And it's no secret that what we are handling right now, Congressman Carvajal, it's complicated. We're talking about so many angles, so many resources that are needed a lot of work that still needs to be done. But before going to what the future it's waiting for us, Congressman, I would like us to speak about the HR 5038, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act that you helped pass last year. In short words, can you please explain to us what this means and what impact it has had in our community?
Thank you very much. And I must say, I'm extremely honored to be on a panel with three strong, extraordinary women doing extraordinary work for the Latino community and farm workers and essential workers throughout our country. So thank you for your good work. In terms of this piece of legislation that you mentioned, this legislation is bipartisan legislation that came about as a result of various stakeholders working together. The United Farm Workers of America, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the California Farm Bureau. The U.S. Farm Bureau didn't come around at the end, but all these other groups did. And while not perfect, it's a piece of legislation that does two things. It provides a legal pathway for undocumented essential workers, farm workers, to be able to legalize themselves and their families. Certainly, there's some criterias involved, but to allow them to come out of the shadows and to be able to contribute to our economy and not live in fear themselves and their families. So and providing an essential workforce also for the ag sector. The second piece was to be able to modernize and reorganize and restructure the H-2A program in a way that, in essence, created a new guest worker program that addresses some of the issues and challenges that all stakeholders had in mind from both the ag perspective and the farm worker perspective, provided some protections for farm workers. It is not the guest worker program that my father came to this country under and experienced lots of injustices. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But what this legislation does, it provides a real valid program that allows the farm workers that are undocumented to come out of the shadows. Hey, I'm a son of a farm worker, and I know firsthand the challenges associated with coming from a family who toils in the fields all day long. You know, little protections. At least once upon a time, there were even less. Minimum wage, not the support that you need. And so I know firsthand that this legislation would go a long way in really helping those families come out of the shadows and be able to have a more stable quality of life. And hopefully, like I tell many people that come see me, including farmers, maybe some of their children also grow up to be members of Congress, amongst other things.
Congressman Carvajal, in fact, it's something that could make a difference. And my next question is also going to be for Monica, you being an attorney. And the angle is going to be, Monica, in terms of how are we implementing these laws that are being passed? Okay. And I'll also, before going back to Congressman Carvajal on the next steps, I'd like to remind our audience to please put the questions in the Q&A box. We already have a few questions. And as soon as we wrap up a little bit more of this conversation, we'll continue to ask and flow the conversation a little bit more. Congressman, it's really, it's definitely making a difference, all the efforts by this letter that you sent that was signed by so many people, so many of our congressmen that are on the same side of the coin, trying to fix the problems. What else needs to be done from your perspective? We have three wonderful leaders here, and they're the forefront at the battle. I'm a journalist, but we do not have the access that you have. You're right in the middle where everything's happening, where the laws are being passed, where everything's being pushed forward or pushed back. What needs to get done in order to really make a difference for the farm workers who are essential workers being treated as disposable ones?
Well, we need to get this legislation over the finish line. What I failed to mention earlier is that while the House has passed it, it has not gone anywhere because the Senate hasn't taken any action and certainly hasn't made it to this president who's been anti-immigrant for his entire tenure. You're referring, Tsitsiki, to a letter that I co-led with a number of my colleagues that ultimately a lot of those protections and support for farm workers and essential workers was included in the legislation that the House of Representatives passed over 4 months ago, called the HEROES
Correct.
Act. And
Correct.
that legislation provides a lot of the support that we all want. It's not perfect again, but it provides a lot of the support that we are all talking about today. Childcare, better access to healthcare, direct financial support to farm workers, essential workers. So that letter was able to provide the foundation for a lot of what was included in the HEROES Act. Now, the HEROES Act, we've been waiting for 4 months for the Senate to get off their behind and do the work that they need to do. Right now, there's negotiations going on to try to move forward an economic relief package that I'm hoping, many of us are hoping, contains some of these components for essential workers and farm workers that were included in the HEROES Act. We know the HEROES Act isn't going to move forward as a total package, but we're all hoping that whatever is negotiated includes as many of these protections as possible. Look, this president in our country recently has been treating all of a sudden farm workers as essential workers. But this president, it doesn't hesitate to throw them under the bus and see them as disposable and expandable workers. We can't have it both ways. They're either essential and providing for essential food supply for our country, something that we all depend on in our nation, and what we also ought to be treating farm workers as from a humanitarian standpoint. All of a sudden, we're dealing with a pandemic. This is a crisis that's affecting everyone. And some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and this president treat them as if they're disposable. And what we need to do is treat them like we're treating every person that lives in this country. Whatever support they need for their health, for their families to be able to get ahead and continue to stay afloat, we need to do that. They should not be treated as expandable and yet see them as the essential workers that they are.
Now, Monica, you're an attorney as well. And by hearing Kim mentioning how OSHA, for instance, has no impact and there is a huge fight to try to get them to make a difference in the safety, why are laws not being implemented to secure the safety of the Latino workers? How can they be implemented even in rural areas where it's not Washington, D.C., it's not Oregon, I mean, it's not the main cities, but it's places like Oregon or, the rural areas that we don't really look all the time? Is there something that can be done in the legal aspect from it all?
Well, there's several things. First, as the congressman noted, there are laws on the books that protect farm workers, and we need the Department of Labor, we need and OSHA to actually follow up on the complaints that are being made. There are advocates like all of us participating in this conversation who make complaints, who help workers make complaints. And so there has to be the will to do the investigations that are required in a timely fashion, in a way that is not biased towards the employer, in order to figure out what the problems are so they can be corrected. Unfortunately, in my experience during this COVID crisis, where we have made referrals for matters where workers have been exposed to COVID and are believed to be working and not able to take the leave needed despite having COVID, the response was that there was concern around the safety of the investigators of the federal agencies and concern that they might get sick if they try to help farm workers who have COVID. So that is completely unacceptable. So we need to make sure that the laws that are on the books are enforced and that the agencies are doing their jobs and responding to the complaints and doing the necessary follow-up in a timely manner. But beyond that, to the extent that there are new laws that are being passed and efforts underway to get more protections for workers, we need to make sure that there are funds appropriated so that the agencies have the resources to be able to do whatever additional work needs to happen. And then I would say on the worker side, it is our job as advocates and organizers to make sure that workers have information about what their rights are and how they can assert their rights where there have been violations. And so I think it's a combination of things. We need the agencies to do their jobs. We need Congress to make sure that they have the money to do their jobs. And we need workers to know what their rights are so that they can then make complaints, and advocates and organizers ready to help support workers as they use their power to, bring problems to light.
I'm glad that you mentioned it as a strategy, Monica, not just one point. We need to do this and that's it. No, there's so many aspects and elements going towards the issue, not just the farm workers being prepared and knowing their rights, also having our legislators such as Congressman Carvajal making their efforts on the Capitol, and also at the same time, the agencies, which is something that I would like to touch with you, Kim. OSHA, an agency such as OSHA, how do we keep monitoring agencies like this one and keep pushing for them not just to do their job, but use the resources from the community?
What has happened is that OSHA has really been defunded and deregulated. And what we are seeing, especially from this administration, is that the agency really they're supposed to be protecting workers' health and safety and to enforce the standards that are on the books, but they're not. What we're seeing from our from this administration is that employers' liability or an immunity shield is more important to protect CEOs and to protect their shareholders, and instead of frontline workers in this country. And we need to have that change. It's part of the systemic racism, I think, that we see in our own economy. It's about protecting the haves and not protecting the have-somes or have-nots. And we really need the only way that we're going to have real change is we need to change the administration we have right now. And we need elected officials, our communities and leaders to stand up for workers' rights. We need stronger labor laws so that workers have a right to join or form a union. That's another important aspect of, giving workers these protections so that they have advocates in their corners, so that they have a voice. But really, with OSHA, I mean, they've been absent through this entire pandemic. As Monica said, they're sheltered in, they're shuttered in. Well, frontline workers risk their lives every single day to make sure that our country is fed. And it's shameful. I'm disgusted. I'm outraged by it. Like I said, you cannot resurrect the dead. And their job was absolutely to prevent and mitigate death and a serious injury. And they failed. They failed workers, and they failed to do their job.
I'd like to stress on the point that Monica brought up regarding before going to Congressman Carvajal. And the question is for you, Reina. Monica mentioned the need also for the workers to be prepared, to be knowledgeable, to know their rights. What are the main challenges that we're facing on this aspect of the subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think that on the one hand, we just need more people to be getting out there, helping us organize and educate people about their rights. I think that even an organization like PECUN, we're one of the longest standing Latinx-led organizations in Oregon. We still need more people out there that are able to communicate and educate people on their rights. But even when we do, I think it's really important to go back to this very real thing that's happening, which is the system is broken. There is no positive incentive for our workers to go and tell OSHA that they just got abused at work, or to tell OSHA that they weren't provided PPE, or to tell OSHA that they were retaliated against because they spoke up and they knew their rights, right? Because right now what's happening is that agricultural workers, at least the ones that I just was talking to, they have lost faith into their agencies, because when they do complain, what ends up happening is that whatever contratista they're working for, or whatever grower they're working for, they get blackballed and they get fired, and then they can't find work. And then who's going to feed the family? Who's going to take care of the kids, right? So we're running into that problem now, that people don't even want to make the complaint to OSHA anymore. I had some very courageous agricultural workers really giving it to the OSHA director last week and was saying, ¿Por qué no nos está ayudando? Nosotros hemos hablado. We have made the complaint. We went on the record. And what we got was a boot, right? We can't find work anymore. So this is what's happening on the ground. And what I would really like to, one of the things that we talked to the OSHA director about was we would really like to see these investigations happening. We want to see something in the form of no requirements for OSHA to announce themselves to these employers that they're going to be coming for these checks. And we also want to see that workers are empowered by the state to become whistleblowers and not
What do you
have
mean by no
to put their name
requirements,
on.
Reina? Could you please explain that when you said that we want to call for no requirements when OSHA? Elaborate on that.
Yes. So one of my workers let me know that OSHA gives employers a heads up before they go do these checks. That means that some of these workers have reported staging happening. You know, they haven't been wearing PPE, but all of a sudden today they did porque viene OSHA. Okay, so that is one important piece of feedback that they gave us in these past couple of weeks. OSHA should not be telling employers that they're coming. And number two, I think that it's really important to know that a worker is really putting themselves out there when they go on the record and make these complaints, right? It takes a lot of courage. And the reason is because they will probably not have a job that next week. So we would like to also see some kind of protections for workers who do come out and become whistleblowers, that they can keep their identity anonymous if possible, and that the state does empower workers to be these whistleblowers in these spaces, because right now we are not seeing the action being taken when the workers do make these complaints. There's a punishment that ends up happening in the form of retaliation, and it's at the intersection of immigration status. Today, even with the COVID pandemic, even with the wildfires, the number one thing that comes up is, ¿y cuándo nos van a dar un permiso para trabajar? When are we going to be able to be here with a permit or with citizenship or legalization? Because at this point, the fact that people cannot get access to emergency supports, that they are not entitled to unemployment insurance in this time, that workers' compensation is scary to apply for because they ask for a social security number. All of these things are starting to layer up on people. And I think that in these moments, our community is very resilient, but we cannot expect, how much can we expect a human to take?
Excellent and good points, Reina. And before going to you, Congressman Carvajal, I want to hear your thoughts on Monica's, Kim's, and Reina's words and their concerns that we're bringing up, and how do we put it all together and find ways to stop politicizing these subjects, not just this one, but the ones that we're facing. I'd like to remind our audience that in a few minutes we're going to be starting the Q&A, so please keep sending the questions on the box. And also I'd like to invite everyone to keep tweeting, and the hashtag, if I have it right here, is CHCIHHM20 for this panel. Now, Congressman Carvajal, escuchamos sus palabras. Adelante.
Well, I think Reina, Monica, and Kim were on point. Everything they said is completely valid. And earlier I mentioned the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act has a few protections that I want to highlight. One is it's protection from deportation. At least if we can't do something for the long term, at least provide some assurances now. Secondly, it provides some more protections, giving guidance to OSHA to make sure that they develop more protections and that they fulfill the responsibility more. Those are just a few things of what's included in the HEROES Act. And again, all of the points that have been raised are absolutely valid. And I know firsthand, as I mentioned earlier, as a son of a farm worker, that these are all issues that are faced by farm workers on a daily basis. The retribution is very real. And it is not to say that there's not a few farmers out there that are doing the right thing and are trying to do the right thing. I visited with a few of those, and I was encouraged by some of the measures being taken by a few of the farmers. But I got to tell you, overwhelmingly, there are a lot more is needed, and we need to do that as soon as possible because people are hurting, families are hurting, they're scared to death. To contract this disease and to be able to not be able to provide for their families because they're in a catch-22. If they can't work, despite how deadly this virus is, they can't provide for their families because Congress has failed to implement and provide for the essential support for essential frontline farm workers and packing house workers. We have failed them dramatically in the first CARES Act. And that's why it's so important now that we advocate from top down and bottom up and every which way to shed a light on the needs and the challenges that continue to confront essential frontline farm workers.
Congressman, as a journalist, I've learned to fight and to choose my battles, right? I can perceive what the story is, what matters, what doesn't matter, what's sexy to an audience, what's not sexy, but it's important. And I've had the issue about fighting to get corporate, or my boss or Univision or Entrevisión to say, okay, Chichiki, go with that story. No, but this one will get us more ratings. No, but that one is better. Those are the challenges that I face as a journalist to try to make a difference in my job. What are the challenges that you face as a politician when you bring something that is legitimate, that it's needed, and that it doesn't get done?
Well, I keep advocating, but let me tell you the tack that I've taken with a lot of my colleagues, especially those on the other side of the aisle. My argument has been, look, we can get back to fighting like cats and dogs, like that little cartoon where they punch in and they're fighting on policy issues in the future. But right now, we need to treat the needs of farm workers during this pandemic from a humanitarian standpoint. If people were drowning and people were dying, no matter who they are, from wherever they are, our country has, for the most part, not always, been sympathetic to making sure that we are taking a humane approach to supporting and helping people. Well, we need to take that approach with all workers right now. We need to forget about this, whether they're legal or not. That's irrelevant. People are hurting. People's health care and their lives are at stake. And we need
They're
to do
feeding
everything
our
possible.
tables, Congressman. They're feeding our families. They're putting
That's
the food
exactly
on
it.
everybody's
Well,
place.
they're essential workers providing for the lifeline for our country. And as such, we should balance that out with the fact that this is not a time to get caught up in the usual skirmish of are they undocumented, are they not? Are they citizens, are they not? This is a time to appreciate them for the hard work that they're doing for our country and providing them support.
Okay, we have some time for Q&A from an audience, and I like to make sure that I have this Slido graphic. This is the first time that I'm using this Slido, just to be honest. So bear with me. Let me make sure that I have it on my camera. And if I'm not mistaken, I'll be able to read a couple of the questions, and I'll try to gear it towards one of our panelists, including you, Congressman. You're more than welcome to pitch in and make a comment. The same thing with us. So if we can have a point that is relevant, let's share it. One of the questions is the following one. What programs have proved successful in meeting the unique needs of essential farm workers and their families while they serve the American people? Who would like to answer that question? Raise your hand to make sure that I have. What programs have proved successful? Monica.
Well, I think that there are a lot of organizations, including the three organizations that we work with, that have been, putting together rapid response plans to get money, food, and other items to workers right now during this crisis. We can't wait for the bills to pass to hope that the relief will come to our communities. We have to organize to get to the community what they need right now. So there have been many organizations across the country like ours that have been creating rapid response programs in response to the COVID pandemic. And those have proved crucial to making sure that farm workers have the food that they need to eat, the childcare that they need, the money that they have to make sure that they can pay their rent. And, those are stopgaps. What we need is real solutions. We need change in the law. We need permanent care beyond this crisis for the workers, and changes to the laws related to workers' rights. But in this COVID moment, we've seen organizations and unions rising up in extraordinary ways in order to help the community. And we've seen farm workers themselves organizing to get goods and needs to other community members. It's been remarkable, but I don't think that any one of our organizations or the community should have had to step in the way that has had to happen because the government has failed us.
Kim, you wanted to mention something briefly.
Yes, one of the programs or something that would really help workers is to end the work while sick culture in this country. And by passing paid sick leave, we were able to get that in Colorado this year. It will take effect in January, but bargaining through our collective bargaining agreements, paid sick leave really would help save lives. Workers should not have to face financial devastation, homelessness, or starvation, or make a hard decision to choose to go to work sick and potentially die, especially with how deadly COVID was. And this work well sick culture in this country is something that we need elected leaders to pass a federal law that requires employers to pay paid sick leave and also for paid family leave. It's something that has to be addressed, but we can do it through collective bargaining and also pushing on the state and federal level.
Before going to you, Reina, I'll ask this question to Congressman Carvajal. It has to do more with how can we work together. And Congressman, the question, it says the following way. How can policymakers and employers work together to protect the relief they need during this challenging time? What are the tactics that you think, as a legislator in someone in the politics world, can be implemented to just get away from the politics and get it done at the end of the day?
Well, I think it means implementing the things that were outlined today in the discussion. The protections for workers, recognizing that they're essential workers, making sure that we're working together to find common ground so that legislators aren't going in just one direction, or that various stakeholders aren't just moving in a different direction. We got to be able to work together to find that common ground and that scope and framework that we can all agree on. The case in point is the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. Like I said, it was far from perfect, but it was something that many stakeholders were able to come together on. And let me just say that I appreciate Reina and Monica and Kim touching on some of the other efforts that have been done by non-government agencies. Many foundations came together, many philanthropists. I'm proud to be from the state of California, where the governor put together a fund to assist those undocumented essential workers. We have a number of organizations and foundations that work to put undocu funds together, as was said earlier, to be able to help now with the needs of those families and essential workers, not wait for Congress or the federal government to act. Other stakeholders, other players, such as the state of California, I'm sure other states have done the same, have worked aggressively to make sure that they are doing their part. At the end of the day, this is a collective effort, and we can all do our part either separately or collectively. And in some cases, separately is okay, because we're not going to wait for the federal government and Congress to get our act together. We have not been as successful as we should have because of the natural politics that are associated here in Washington.
Excellent point that you brought up as well, Congressman. Working separately or working together. Ideally, we need to work together. And that brings me to the next question, Reina. And it's very interesting. This is from a consumer in Carolina. She says, as a consumer, is there anything I can do to directly support the farm workers who are risking their lives to provide for the rest of this country? What will you answer?
Absolutely. I think that one of the most important things is to know and know where your food is coming from. I know that a lot of people buy organic, right? But nobody's looking for the signals of whether the workers were treated fairly and whether there was a standard. One of the things that Pecun's been working on is being on the board of the Equitable Food Initiative, which is actually working to create a label that has that is given to different food that is actually right now being carried at Costco and Whole Foods, and it creates an actual standard for workplace treatment, and it involves a whole list of really important elements to ensuring that the worker safety is at the forefront, that workers are being paid fairly, and that there's actually a space for workers to be able to have direct conversations with employers and really negotiate the situation in the space. I mean, Pecun started off as a farm farm worker union, and in Oregon, we still don't have the legal right to collectively bargain. We're still in that fight, right? So I think that is one thing that folks can do. I think it's also really important that we support farm worker organizations across the country. We got the Immokalee workers in Florida, we got Flock, we got Migrant Justice, we got Alianza Campesina, we got Community to Community. We have a bunch of organizations that are really supporting. Look up one of those organizations, support them. They're working hard on a scrappy budget. And I would also say that continuing to support the work of Representative Salud Carvajal, who's trying to get us a big national change, but also there's stuff happening on the local level. At least in Oregon, we were able to pass temporary OSHA rules for field sanitation, transportation, and housing to make sure workers had PPE, ventilation, 1-to-10 ratio of toilets. Believe it or not, that's still a fight we're fighting, making sure we have hand washing stations. We're trying to make that into a permanent standard. And if folks can give a nudge to OSHA, that actually helps a lot for us to be able to make these long-term changes in our communities. And follow PECU and get on Facebook and follow what we're doing and make sure you amplify it, because it really does help to do your little part. Whatever you have access to, whatever your platform is, use it. I don't think that everybody is going to be an activist on the streets, but some people have other platforms that they can use and they use it to the best of their abilities. And I've seen some people do some really cool things doing that.
I like to make echo of those words, Reina. Of course, we have people that are not necessarily the powerful women that we have here, Monica, Kim, and Reina, and of course the legislative part and the powerful part of politics, Congressman Salud Carvajal. But we can all learn, as we were mentioning before. How can we be prepared? And I think the foundation of that is getting to know our rights, whether we work in the fields, whether we work in the kitchen, it doesn't matter. Knowing what our rights are, I think, is fundamental. Now, I have time for one more question from our audience, and I'll ask it, and then you decide who wants to answer it. After that, we're going to be having just 30 to 40 seconds for each one of you to give your final words before we conclude this session. So the question says the following way: how can states work to fill gaps that the federal government seemingly cannot fill? And what are some examples of the states leading the change? Who wants to answer? This is an interesting question. We're not talking about just federal, but also state-wise.
Well, let me just start if it's okay.
Yes,
Go ahead,
absolutely.
Monica. Go ahead.
I'd like to hear from you,
I yield to
Congressman.
you, Monica.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, in California, like I said, I'm proud to be from a state that has extraordinary leadership, being mindful of the gaps that exist that the federal government has not addressed, and taking the lead, be it with the undocumented funds that we talked about, providing PPE, addressing the needs of families that oftentimes are disenfranchised and lack the support that they need. But what I would say is that whether it's not just the states, local institutions are in a position to help greatly as well, making sure that I think local legislative bodies are doing their part, because the state is one big body, but then you have all these subunits of government, and we need to make sure that that is filtering down from states all the way down to local legislative bodies as well.
That is an interesting point, Congressman. Thank you for explaining how those things work. Monica, briefly, go ahead and comment.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I think states need to have health and safety mandates for the agricultural industry related to COVID. Not all of them have adopted health and safety standards related to COVID for the agricultural industry. That needs to happen. I agree that the funds need to be created, but we also need to look at basic farm worker rights in states, and we need state legislation passed that will, mirror some of the protections that are already available for farm workers in California and in some other states. New York just had their farm worker bill passed last year. We need more of that around the country, because if farm workers don't even have basic rights, how can we imagine that they're going to get more protections during times of crisis? And the last thing I would say is, over Labor Day weekend, we launched the National Essential Worker Bill of Rights campaign. And as a part of that campaign, our organization with National Domestic Workers Alliance, Jobs with Justice, and some other groups, we have state initiatives that are happening. And here in Ohio, I'm proud to say that we're the first ones out the gate. And yesterday in Toledo, Ohio, the city council put forward an essential workers resolution. So we need to see essential workers Bill of Rights passed at the state level and through local city councils, and eventually we need to make sure that an essential worker Bill of Rights passes through Congress to make sure that farm workers and all workers who are doing these essential jobs have the protections that they need.
Excellent. How about we go and talk about the last words, the final thoughts from all of us. And before we start with you, Kim, I'd like to just make sure that we get everybody to know Kim Cordova from United Food and Commercial Workers. We also have Monica Ramirez from Justice for Migrant Women, Reina Lopez from PICUN. I was saying that before, Reina, PCUN, but it's PICUN. I like that better. And of course, our Congressman Salud Carvajal. Kim, what are your final words on this session?
I want the viewers to really understand that, workers are part of our communities, their families, they're somebody's mother, father, sister, brother, son, or daughter, and that we matter. And they matter, and they deserve the protections that everybody else has. They are critical and essential workers, providing, again, food and the services that our country needs to continue to, to sustain life. And we need to do everything we can to protect them. And I am very grateful to be on a panel with such strong leaders, and I appreciate your advocacy and for having this conversation, because we need to protect our fellow brothers and sisters out there.
We appreciate your efforts, Kim, as well. Thank you. Reina.
Thank you. I think I want to just close out by expressing deep love and gratitude to all the agricultural workers who are out there right now, making sure that Americans have food on their table, breathing in very hazardous air due to the wildfires on the West Coast. And I think that, unfortunately, due to climate change, this isn't going to be the last time we see this situation in Oregon and along the West Coast. Workers will show up. We don't want to lose our jobs, and we're very proud of the service we provide our state here in Oregon and the country, but please don't take advantage of that dedication. We need America to consider us too as people, as humans, especially as conditions continue to get worse.
Monica.
We've been talking a lot today about OSHA and its role in protecting workers. And I think it's important for us to remember that as this COVID pandemic has been, playing out over the past few months, the other violations of farm workers' rights didn't stop. Farm workers continue to experience sexual harassment. They continue to experience wage theft. They continue to experience a number of different harms. And one of the questions that people have is, what is it going to look like when things get back to normal? And what we all need to understand is that the exclusion of farm workers from basic protections in our country has never been normal. Returning to normal cannot include the continued exclusion of farm workers from their most basic rights, protections, and benefits. So as we think about what it looks like going forward, I hope all of us will commit to fighting alongside and with farm workers to win basic rights, to overtime, to fair pay, and all the other things that farm workers have been denied for over 80 years. Because it is the denial of these basic rights that has put farm workers in the precarious conditions that they've been in over these past few months. So we're calling on all of you to join us in this fight.
You've nailed it, Monica. Thank you for your strong words as usual. Now we have our Congressman Salud Carvajal. What are your final thoughts on this discussion, Congressman?
I want to say ditto for all that my co-panelists said. I think they're right on point. It could have been more important than ever that we address these issues, making sure that farm workers have worker rights that they have been denied for so many years, and that we don't just go back to a normal of assuming that things were great before. They weren't. And I think Monica so well characterized the plight of farm workers. Let me just go back to what Kim said earlier. The thing we could do best right now is look no further than the November election. People need to be engaged, people need to register to vote, and people need to vote. because at the end of the day, and unless change comes in November, this abyss of a situation will continue. And I'm not just referring to the pandemic. I'm referring to the demagoguing that has taken place from this administration for the past 4 years of immigrants, and many of those who are essential and frontline workers that we're discussing today. So if we're going to bring about change for essential workers and for all Americans in a way that moves us forward, workers with rights and dignity, support for families, working people and families, we need to bring about change this November. So without a further ado, get engaged, register to vote, turn out and vote, and let's see a new America comes November 3rd.
Congressman, muchas gracias. Gracias, Kim Cordova, Mónica Ramírez, Reina Lopez. Excellent panel. It's been a pleasure to share it with you.
Thank you.
To talk to our audience, as I mentioned before during the beginning of this session, I host a political show every week, and there is so much information that it doesn't end. It doesn't, sometimes we don't know which subject to attack, which subject to bring, and what the angles are. And as a journalist, I can share with you what a challenge that is, but that cannot allow us to deviate from the core center of the issues. And this is our community and everything that is being exposed by COVID-19 during this pandemic. Everything has been magnified. And therefore, our efforts, the information, the reporting, and the actions have to be magnified. I really enjoy having these conversations. I enjoy the fact that you are sharing this conversation with us. I ask you to get involved in different angles. I get involved as a journalist, our leaders, as they are, the forefront line, and of course, our congressmen, senators, and anything that happens during this November has to be going forward towards a solution for our community to have a better quality of life. And having talked about these problems today, I think the question here is, how do we protect those that are protecting us? They protect us by putting the food on our table. They protect us by allowing us to buy the meat from the meat packing companies. How do we protect them? How do we protect their lives? How do we put food on their table when they need it the most? So it's just a matter of common sense. This is not even about politics. This is not even about what we like and whether we are Republicans, whether we are Democrats. It has nothing to do with that. How do we take action on those issues? My name is Tsatsiki Felix. It's been a pleasure, and I thank you for joining us today. I hope you join us as well tomorrow throughout CHCI. I thank Marco Davis as well for making all these efforts through these conferences of powerful community. Thank you all. Have a great day. Talk to you later.